Thank you so much for being here today. You are giving us some of your time, and that's a very precious commodity. And we thank you for that. We're humbled by it, and we want to make sure that we honor it. This is Conflict Resolution Month. October is, and this is our 8th annual Conflict Resolution Month here at Sam Houston State University. And one of the things that we try to do here is to really bring in some world-class experts to talk to us about conflict, what it is, how we respond to it in professional and responsible ways. This is towards the end of the month, and so we still have some other activities going on. We encourage you to visit our website, shsu.edu/SLMS, along with our social media. It's all SHSU SLMS on all major social media, so you can see what other speakers we have coming in this week. We've got someone who's going to talk to us about something that we've all agreed to, but don't know about it, a concept called arbitration. Anjanil Gray from the American Arbitration Association is going to be speaking with us. And we're also encouraging everyone to go see a documentary that's available on YouTube. It's called How to Love Your Enemy, a Restorative Justice Story. It's a really great short but powerful documentary about how some folks in a Colorado town look at criminal justice in a little different way and the effect it has on the society, the victim, the offender, the law enforcement agencies. And it's just a different way of doing things. And I want to mention that because restorative justice is kind of a creative way of doing things, and that's our topic today. You know, every day we negotiate. Some of us negotiate with our spouses or partners. Some of us are successful in those negotiations, and sometimes we're not. We negotiate with our family members. Sometimes we negotiate with ourselves. We've got a lot of books that have been written about negotiation. Some universities have negotiation training courses. One of the probably most well-known is at Harvard with its program on negotiation. Some cultures negotiate differently. Some cultures really enjoy and are used to negotiations. Others are not. For some, negotiation, maybe it's natural. For some, it's a learned experience. For some, it's something that's very scary. And for other people, it's all of those things. Negotiation can be a combination of both art and science. Resolving conflict requires excellent negotiation skills. President Kennedy once said, "Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate." Good negotiators read books and articles and get advice from experts. Oftentimes, our default is to think about how we can negotiate to a common ground. But today, I'm going to suggest, and we are going to suggest, that we can negotiate to a higher ground. John DeGroote is a masterful negotiator, and we are so pleased that he's providing some of his time to us today. He received his bachelor's degree from Mississippi State University and his law degree from Duke. He is a lawyer and was a lawyer with a nationally known litigation firm that was based in Dallas. He's also served as a chief litigation counsel, chief legal officer, and ultimately the president of KPMG Consulting Bearing Point, which was a $3 billion with a B billion-dollar consulting firm with 17,000 employees. He then took the higher road and became a mediator, arbitrator, settlement counsel, neutral, specializing in complex business, technology, and intellectual property matters. He's been the lead settlement negotiator in hundreds of cases in at least 20 states. He's the founder of DeGroote Partners in Dallas that provides mediation, arbitration, and settlement counsel services for clients, where he focuses on adding value. He's an extraordinarily successful person. And in spite of all that success, he's also extraordinarily humble. He's a thought leader in our industry, and he's one of the most brilliant and creative people I have ever met. Today, John's going to help us to negotiate better and to do so with creativity. Before I turn it over to John, I want to identify another characteristic that John possesses. He's generous. John has quite generously donated a bunch of these things, think packs. And people who are registered for today will be eligible to get a think pack. It may be a random drawing, but you're eligible for the random drawing. And John, we thank you for donating those to us here at Sam Houston State. Few housekeeping matters before we turn this over to John. First, this is going to be recorded for future purposes, and so please be aware of that. Secondly, microphones should be off, but we'd appreciate your cameras being on so we can see you. Third, if you want to ask questions, please do. We encourage you to ask questions via the chat, and you can put them to everyone or to myself or to Jessica in our office, and we'll get to those questions at the end of John's presentation. And fourth, we'd like to encourage you to put Zoom into speaker view so that you can see John and his presentation and his slide deck. So with all of that, would y'all please help give a warm and virtual Bearcat welcome to John DeGroote.
Gene, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And thank you for your invitation. And frankly, I'm thrilled that this is being taped because I'm going to play that introduction back to you on occasion as we go forward. And Gene, I also appreciate your collaboration over the past 12 years. You said I'm a thought leader, but I recall about 12 years ago when I was all out of ideas and I asked you to, I reached out to you on the internet and said, hey, let's meet up at Central Market and see if we can talk about different ways to mediate. And it was that changed the trajectory of how I do what I do, and I appreciate that. And for everybody's benefit out there, I am a mediator and an arbitrator and an outside board member, and I've done that for a long time. But Gene mentioned I went to Mississippi State. At my essence, I'm a farm boy from South Mississippi still, and I certainly enjoy getting back to Mississippi every now and then. But let's talk a little bit about things that I do in Dallas and around. Hopefully, folks can have something that they can take away today as they learn to negotiate more creatively going forward. In my business, my tagline is customized solutions to complex situations, and frankly, those are generally need to be creative solutions because I think most folks have already tried to get things done and been unable to do so, and they come here maybe for a fresh set of eyes or a fresh set of for a fresh perspective. And so I might go into negotiation with creativity, but to be candid, I haven't really thought enough about how it is that I do what I do, or more importantly, how it is that we all can become more creative as we negotiate going forward. I recently dealt with a large software dispute in Chicago, an auto manufacturing dispute in Detroit, a trust and estate deal off in West Texas, and each one of those required a new and creative perspective. But in none of those instances did I stop and look back and think, how is it that we can be more creative here? We just thought instead about how to get things done and how to let people move on and move forward. And so I will say that as I prepared this talk, which I did from the ground up, I have become much more reinvigorated. I guess I'm doubling up on my mores and my re's. I've become much more invigorated coming into negotiations, in part because I've thought a lot about how it is that creativity happens, which in itself has assisted my own negotiations. All that said, to me, it all boils down to one question, which is the problem what you think it is? And I want to tell you the story of the frustrated skiers that I think might bring this home for all of us. And that is, there's a couple here in Dallas, and they wanted to ski together. And she unfortunately had a job that kept her working super hard until year end, and his job picked up right at January 1st, and it sort of blocked out. It really made it difficult. They kept asking themselves every September. They would look at their calendars and say, "How can we ski together this winter?" And they never could make it work. more and more frustrated they became until finally she saw in a travel magazine a travel ad for skiing in Argentina. And I certainly didn't think about this in advance, but I can tell you all that peak skiing season in Argentina is in July and August rather than in our winter. It's in their winter. And so had they just reframed the question only slightly and dropped two words, instead of saying, how can we ski together this winter? Had they said, how can we ski together? They might have thought about it. And so the key takeaway today is the problem what you think it is? And can you redefine it in a way that will help you come up with different solutions? This kind of negotiation creativity, by the way, it isn't always easy. And because first we have to get creative even before we dive into the negotiation. Seth Godin, who is the only blog that I read every single day, says, we're all born creative, but it takes a little while to become afraid. And I think that's right. Tom and David Kelly, who founded IDEO, remind us all that when we're little, we drew simple drawings of dinosaurs. They might have looked like little blobs, but we weren't embarrassed of them. We developed our own little world and enhanced our own creativity with others just like us. As we began to socialize and got closer to our teens, we began to suppress our creative side. And for many of us, we never recaptured it to the degree that we otherwise could have. And so through research, I have determined that creativity is something you practice. It's not something you're born with, and it's not something you're just going to happen upon. So today we're going to talk about how to practice negotiation and a whole lot more differently. So with that, where do we start? We start with Edward de Bono's quote, which I love, which says, you can't dig a hole in a different place by digging the same hole deeper. And Edward de Bono was right. Let me tell you, the results you get as you negotiate are the result of the problem as you see it. And so if in a negotiation, you will reevaluate every aspect of the situation from every angle, literally take it apart and examine it, you'll come up with new ways every time. I'll give you an example that was in Forbes that I modified slightly for today. We're going to call it the story of the bike shop entrepreneur. And because this was a real bucket of cold water moment for me. This bike shop entrepreneur decided that he wanted to sell his bike shop. And as he listed it for sale, he got three offers. Company A offered him $200,000. Company B offered him $300,000. And company C offered him $500,000. Most of us probably would have said, hey, you know what I'll do? I'll negotiate on that $500,000 number, see what I can do, get this deal closed, take my $500,000 and move on. But instead, he reevaluated the problem. He reevaluated every component of the situation. And he thought to himself, what are each company's interests? What are their values and what are their purposes? After evaluating where each was coming from, he realized that he was able to say yes to all three, netting $1 million to what I will now call the bike shop millionaire. Now, how did he do it? Company A actually just wanted his inventory for $200,000. Company B was coming into town to sell bikes in a big way, and they wanted his customer list. And company C was a big box store that just wanted his real estate. He realized I can combine all three offers and make $1 million instead of a subset of it by focusing just on what the big number was. Had he thought for a minute about all I want is money and I just want the top dollar offer I can get, had he not reevaluated the situation, had he kept his head in that hole like that dog is, he would have never gotten the money that he otherwise did. And so as he goes forward, or as you go forward, you think, what part of the situation can I change? In his situation, it was the assumption that there would just be one sale. Now I'll take a breath for a second and say, with the stories of the frustrated skiers and the bike shop millionaire behind us, are we really ready to challenge are assumptions? Let's find out. Let's talk about the black pebble. Don't know how many of you have ever heard the black pebble story, but it brings it home to me in a way that many other stories don't. And this is back in olden times, maybe even in medieval times, back when there was debtor's prison. A shopkeeper owes a moneylender a ton of money. After avoiding the moneylender for months, the shopkeeper and the moneylender run into each other on the pebble-strewn street out in the middle of town as the shopkeeper and his daughter walked about doing their own business. And the moneylender confronted the shopkeeper and said, hey, you got to pay me now, or I'm going to take it all and send you off to debtor's prison. There is no doubt the situation was dire. But then the moneylender looked at the shopkeeper and said, you know what? I've got a different offer for you. Why don't I do this? He looked down on at all the black and white pebbles on the path. And he said, I'll put a black pebble and a white pebble in a bag. And if your daughter will withdraw one of the two, her fate can be in your hands. For if she withdraws a black pebble, then your debt is called and she has to marry me and live with me forever. But if she withdraws a white pebble, she is able to, you're able to go free, and she's able to go free, and your debt is canceled. And of course, the shopkeeper is not very excited about this, and the daughter furrows her brow for a moment and says, "Okay, we'll do it." But she watches as the moneylender reaches down and he actually slips 2 black pebbles into the bag with no white pebble option. She evaluates the situation and she only sees initially 3 choices. She could refuse to take a pebble and end the game. She could expose the moneylender as a cheat by showing that there were 2 black pebbles in the bag. Or she could select what she knows for sure would be a black pebble, thus sealing her fate. But then she realizes there is a 4th option, and she closes her eyes and nervously reaches into the bag. And as she pulls what she knows has to be a black pebble out of the bag, she clumsily drops it onto the pebble-strewn path and opens her eyes and says, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm so nervous. I'm so clumsy. I dropped the pebble. Do you mind looking in the bag to see which one remains? For if there was a black one in the bag, I must have withdrawn the white one." The moneylender realized he had been outsmarted, and she and her father were able to move on down the path with the debt forgiven. She changed the rules of the game. She changed the assumptions of the game in order to prevail. In this case, though, she focused on the pebble that was left rather than the pebble she was taking. It's an important concept we'll come back to a couple more times. She focused on the pebble that was left rather than the pebble she was taking. Let's bring this to modern day and throw in a modern day example or two. We'll go to my house where I noted after I moved into my house here in Dallas that the workout room was looking a little ratty. Not that I spend that much time there, but the workout room was looking just a little bit ratty. And the outside of the house, we had some guys painting the gutters and the trim around the house. You're kind of outside painters, and I thought I might try to negotiate the good relationship I had with these guys. And I said, "Hey, will you paint my workout room?" And they said, "Well, sure." And they quoted me a price that to me was exorbitant. And I could have just said, "No, thank you." But I realized after talking to them a little bit that what they did was they painted gutters and trim almost all day. They really didn't have much of an interior painting practice. And I said, "Hey, listen, I want my workout room painted, but I don't need it painted anytime soon. So why don't you just give me a call the next day that there's a rainy day, give me, say, a 40% discount, and but you can paint my workout room on any day you want in the next 6 months. So you've got revenue just waiting for you instead of an idle day." I focused on the day he wasn't selling rather than the day that he was. So with that, what are our key takeaways here? First and foremost, I ask, what's holding you back as you think about the Black Pebble story going forward? Have you assumed in your negotiations non-existent rules, someone else's goals, or non-existent constraints? Of course you have. We all have, and we all do. In the rainy day painter story, I challenged the assumption that my painter had to paint on a specific day. Again, I focused on what he wasn't selling rather than the time that he was. Let's come up with a couple other everyday examples that might turn things around just a little bit. Let's go back to my workout room, by the way. And you all may think I'm the world's cheapest homeowner, and maybe you're right. But again, I in that negotiation, as we worked through the pricing, he said, by the way, you're going to need to buy the paint. And I realized, by the way, that a 40% discount was a big discount for this guy, and I wanted to make sure that he was happy. And I said, that's fine. I'll buy the paint. And he says, paint's pretty expensive. And I said, I know paint's pretty expensive, and but we're going to have to work through this. And I said, but before I do, understand, I don't particularly care, within reason, what color my workout room is. Would you happen to have had any big jobs lately? And he smiled really big and said, oddly enough, one of our other interior jobs, we just finished painting the local Ford dealership. And so the epilogue to this story is I now have a beautiful workout room that is Ford blue. But I did buy that paint from him, and because it was leftover paint that he had bought before, and he made a little bit of extra money and is happy to come back and paint other things at my house. So so in this case, sometimes you have to change your perspective to change your outcomes. Now, in my research, as I was telling you, I did this. The question always or often comes up: do creative people see what other people can't see? And would we all have seen the idea of dropping the pebble, or would we all have thought to just say, "Hey, paint my room on a slack day"? Are creative people smarter, or are they just looking in different places for answers? And I would say for everybody on today's Zoominar that that it's not that the creative folks are smarter. It's just they're looking in different places for answers, and they're used to looking for creative solutions. Again, think about the dog and his head in the hole, because you won't see alternatives while looking at the same thing the same way, only harder. You got to kind of zoom out for a moment and take a look at the situation as you define the problem. As I like to say, get your head out of that hole and figure out how to get to a better deal. So with that, and now that you have a new approach, how do you put it into action? Where do you start? Two words that my grandpa used to always say that I was not excited to hear, but they apply here, are hard work. That's a place to start. Samuel Goldwyn once said, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And that applies in the mediation business and in just about every other aspect of business and life, as far as I'm concerned. And so how do you channel that hard work? First and foremost, as you approach any problem, I think a simple internet search will do. You're not the first to negotiate pitching that freelance job, or selling your car, or hiring a babysitter, or hiring a workout room painter. So take a look at what motivates folks in those scenarios, how it is that they get paid, how they might make a little incremental revenue. Just for grins this morning, I searched for, quote, how to negotiate my real estate commission, close quote. And the second hit was a list of about 6 or 8 different ways to pay less than the standard 6%, or on each side, 3% on your real estate commission. And you might say to me, oh my gosh, John, I don't want to short sheet my realtor, because I want him or her to make a ton of money, and I want them to align their interests with me. This is not just about you paying less. It is about redefining the problem in a way where everybody can actually get a little bit more. For example, one of the solutions I saw just this morning was that if you will agree to sell your house or buy a house during the off season, when he or she's not nearly as busy, you can actually negotiate some off of the commission in some cases. And at the same time, you might actually have a little bit more time from your realtor and a little bit more focus. In other words, you might even be able to get better service for less money. As an aside, I don't want realtors to jump on me or send me emails and say I'm a bad person or anything else. Again, this is simply the second hit on a Google search this morning, and I have not been in the house buying or selling business in a long time. So I have to, it's on the internet, so it must be true, right? So, so first is hard work. Do your homework. Secondly, and by the way, just as an aside, I had to pull up the right image for hard work, and I was looking for images for like a paper notebook and a pen. And one of my 14-year-old boys, I have twins, and one of my 14-year-old boys said, "Dad, that's the wrong kind of notebook. You need to get just a keyboard. That's where the hard work happens." So, a special shout out to my 14-year-old who fixed my image on that issue. So secondly is time to think. Time to think about the situation, not just how to get what you think you want. If you're going to discuss back to this real estate commission issue, if you're about to hire a realtor, the time to negotiate how to structure the transaction is not at 9:50 before you hop in the car at 10 to drive to the realtor's office. It is do it in advance so that you have time to percolate on this. Next, though, is time to not think. And you may think, what in the world is he talking about? There's a University of British Columbia study that I was thrilled to stumble upon that said that mind wandering may evoke a unique mental state that can allow opposing networks to combine ideas to get us to a different place. And I don't doubt that they are right. I found an article by a woman named Nancy Andreasen, who spent her entire life, or has spent her entire life, studying creativity. And what she says is that when these eureka moments occur, it's very often when the mind is relaxed. Think for a minute about your last great idea. Did it come in the shower, or while you were driving, mowing the lawn, exercising, just got up from a nap? By the way, if you just got up from a nap, if you're still able to nap in these times, I'm envious of you as well. But back to the mind being relaxed, that's when these ideas come to us. Importantly, by the way, that is after the hard work is in and after you have thought through it. If you don't understand the problem well enough and haven't done the homework, the great ideas aren't going to come to you. So they actually need to happen in this order if they can. And then lastly is look again. We call it a fresh look, and this fresh look is often what it takes. So okay, you'll work hard, but what are you going to work on? Think about this as you break down. Remember at the beginning of the talk, I said you got to break down the problem or the situation into all of its component parts. A part that we don't have in 1 hour, we don't have time to hit on every single component part. So I want you to hit on the one that is going to be the key driver. What do they want? You've already focused on what you want. You know that you want a lower real estate commission, right? But what they want is often as important as what you want. Think about the constraints and the rules and everything else that apply here, but then think about what they want in context and understand they may be laser focused on initially what they want. They want to make as much money as they can painting my workout room, right? And so they may be focused on the price of they may be laser focused on, can I charge $500, or maybe is it going to be $550, right? They're focused that narrowly. And so you've got to help them zoom back out into the broader problem. You got to help them redefine the situation to bring back the idea of skiing in Argentina, something completely new and off the table. So it's not just about what I want. That rainy day painter is better off because I figured out what he really wanted. And I will just sort of add into that, and that is what people think they want is not necessarily what they want. When I go to Home Depot, in fact, this is my last trip to Home Depot, I went to get a special kind of screwdriver. And so you might say to me as I was walking across the parking lot, what do you want? And I probably would have answered, I want that special kind of screwdriver. But that's really not the case. What I wanted was my bookshelf to stick to my wall. I don't care at the end of the day whether I own that special kind of screwdriver or not. And so you have to ask a few questions to get beyond the initial, what is it that you want, to figure out what they really want. And this is the part that we most often skip because it's only natural that we're focused on ourselves. But what they want can actually be the most important part. I talk here about empathy and putting yourself in their shoes. I've never painted for a living, but I know that those who paint outside don't get paid when it rains. I put myself in their shoes and tried to figure out incremental revenue and how is it that we can drive incremental revenue for my painter. So importantly, though, back to the screwdriver example, what you want doesn't mean what are you asking for. Let's think about what they really want through empathy. Let's come up with a couple other examples to really drive this point home. I mean, obviously, a volume discount is probably one of the most frequent examples that is out there, and that's one that people often think about. But I want to give you another example from my own past and perhaps my misspent youth. But when I was a young lawyer, certainly young lawyers then didn't get paid what they get paid today. And I finally sat down to do a budget and realized that my apartment was way too expensive and I still had 8 months left. And I genuinely could not afford it responsibly and afford other things that I really wanted to afford. And I knew that my apartment complex was fairly aggressive with folks that wanted to break their leases. And so had I simply thought about how do I get this apartment cheaper, I would not have gotten out of the predicament that I was in. But as I walked downstairs and past another apartment, it occurred to me what I could do. The apartment below me was 376 square feet for $395 a month. And it had been empty for a long, long time. And that afternoon, I swung by the rental office and I asked about that apartment. And they said, we can't rent those things to save our lives. And they said frustratingly, or in a frustrated voice, apartments like yours, we've got a waiting list for, but I can't get rid of those things down below. And so I said, how about if I do this? How about if I move downstairs and do a long-term lease at that low number that I can afford? I didn't quite say it that way. And I free up my snazzy apartment for somebody else. And they said, you'd do that for us? And I said, for you, of course I would. And so through empathy, I thought real hard about what is it that they're actually looking for. I'll give you another example. Again, keep in mind, a lot of my creativity comes from not having the money to do the things I wanted to do. But when I was in college, I received a government benefit and there had been an error. And I got a letter demanding that I come down to talk to them about how to deal with a $3,600 overpayment. When I was 18 years old, that might as well have been the entire national debt. I was terrified. So I went down and I met with those folks, and I tried to reduce the amount 6 ways from Sunday, and what occurred to me was all that guy really cared about, it seemed to me, was he needed to check the box that I agreed to pay $3,600. And so I leaked into the idea of paying it out over time. And he said jokingly, I don't care how long it takes you to pay it. And I said, well, I mean, obviously, this error was in part y'all, so I wouldn't want to pay any interest. And he said, I don't need any interest. I need you to agree to pay $3,600. So for the next 360 months, I received, actually 354 months, I received a self-addressed stamped envelope from that organization. And I was able to fill in my credit card number and mail it back for a $10 hit on my credit card. Now, as an aside, why not 360 months? It is because my loving wife took over the family finances and, to my chagrin, sent in $60 to just end that madness. That's a different negotiation, and certainly not one that I want to get in the middle of. But I will say that in the government benefits office, I was able to realize the only variable that he cared about, and I was able to structure a transaction that was completely acceptable around his one goal. So now that we're on the right track, how do we actually do this? We know what to focus on, but how do we do it? Linus Pauling, who was a scientist who discovered chemical bonds, and by the way, random trivia fact, is the only human to have ever received 2 Nobel Prizes unshared with others. Came up with the great, by the way, I think if you do that, we ought to listen to your ideas on creativity, right? He said the best way to get a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. And I could not agree more. Today's focus is on generating a whole lot of new ideas. I would bet that the shopkeeper's daughter came up with a lot of terrible ideas before she came across the great idea of dropping one of the pebbles. And I can say that as I discuss creativity with some of my buddies over the last couple of weeks, getting ready for this talk, I will pass along that there's a little bit of discomfort in this process. What if I have a bad idea? And so I actually did an internet search on, what if you have bad ideas in the creativity or in the idea generation process, or as you have a lot of ideas, some of them won't be good ideas, right? That is absolutely true. And somebody out there said it very, very well. And they said, if you come up with a lot of ideas, you don't have to implement one of the bad ones. You can still go back to the old bad ideas you had in the first place. That shopkeeper's daughter could still have agreed to marry the money lender, or I could still have agreed to pay $3,600 to that benefits office and moved on. Nothing is harmed by coming up with a whole bunch of ideas. So how is it that you get out there and get more ideas? Let's talk a little bit about brainstorming, because it's a word a lot of us use and not one that a lot of us have really thought a whole lot about. And I will say, as I dive into this, one of the things that I do off on the side is I facilitate the generation of strategic plans for nonprofits, not for money, but just as a way to sort of give back. And brainstorming is not a structured process. And so I'm going to give you some quote unquote rules, but the moment I start talking about rules, it applies structure that I think we want to be careful not necessarily to implement. But let's talk about this new path. One of the questions you're going to ask 100 times in a brainstorming session, and we'll talk a little bit more about who all ought to be there in a second, is what if? What if I drop the pebble? What if you paint on a rainy day? What if I stretch this out over 360 months? What if we ski down in Argentina? Those, by the way, are the good ideas. There might be other really, really bad ideas. What if we learn to water ski? Not such a good idea, right? You can drop that one. But ask what if, and ask what if 100 times or even more. The goal here is to understand the situation and every aspect of the situation and the ways to change it for the better. We got to focus on big thinking. Well, I was on a board once where our board chair kept talking about generative thinking, and every time we would get stuck in a rut, he would say, "Look, let's step back. Let's step back and engage in a little bit of generative thinking." And we did that in a group where we had a whiteboard. By the way, that's what the image is here, a whiteboard, and we were able to build on each other's ideas about every aspect of the problem, every angle. And you can ask then, is there a ski slope in Argentina? What if we did this? What if we did that? Now the rules we want to implement are one, there will be no filters, there will be no judgments, and no hierarchies. Meaning this is not a time for the boss to step in and say, all of you are, we're going to have some great ideas and I'm going to tell you all what they are. This is not what that process is going to be like. Instead, this is, you may have some ideas that come from unlikely sources. And as you go through a brainstorming session, again, remember Linus Pauling's advice: the best way to have a great idea is to have a whole lot of ideas. So even if you have the process down, are there tricks to make it easier? Well, of course there are, because I sent the Think Pack onto Gene, and I have my own copy here. And so what we're going to do is we'll talk for a second about the Think Pack, and for those of you that don't have yours yet, that is fine. Within the Think Pack, first of all, there's a little booklet that tells you how to do it in about 4 pages, and then there are individual cards that you pick up and apply in any given situation, and some of them may work and some may not. Some may be good questions, some may be bad questions. This one that I randomly picked up, card number 17, says, can you adapt something from nature to the problem at hand? I don't know how that might apply to the next situation that you have, but it might spark another thought, or you pull up another card. Think Pack will do that for you. There are, I'm not sure exactly how many cards there are in the deck, but there are a ton of cards where you flip through, and I guarantee you it will help you generate a lot of ideas. Back to Linus Pauling's advice. So with that, though, there's also a structured process that that a lot of creativity experts have promoted, and it's called the scamper approach. And you've got the mnemonic device here where you substitute something, combine it with another, and you go down the entire list there. And I'm not going to read the list to you, but what I will say is, in a situation, first is you write out all of the elements. You identify all the component parts. And for me, I handwrite them out on a notepad or on a whiteboard. And so if you're talking about painting the workout room, you talk about the number of people that you're assuming, at least initially. You got paint brushes, you've got the various materials and everything else, and you list all of that. There, even things that you don't think are all that important, right? That's one. And then 2 is you start asking questions about every aspect of your service offering. So I'm going to just jump here to combine it with another, the second line on this mnemonic device. And by the way, parenthetically, note that sometimes these questions will blend you together into different aspects of this, into different lines on this device. The idea is not to stay in your swim lane, but just to come up with lots of good ideas. So on the combination front, the bike shop millionaire said, you know what, I'll take all 3, which reminds me of the old Dallas Cowboys ad where Jerry Jones said to Deion Sanders, what's it going to take, 15, 20 million? And Deion Sanders said both. And that was the year that he signed his $35 million contract. And so you can combine sometimes different aspects. I didn't know until I started doing work on this project that Gutenberg came up with the movable type printing press by way of combining a coin punch and the grape press. And so what can you combine to make things a little bit different? Separately, I'm going to scroll down a little bit more, and you can modify or magnify some aspect of it. And so you can ask yourself the question, how would the negotiation change if you modified some part of it? For example, can I give a realtor a bonus for getting above asking price? Can I give a realtor a bonus for selling my house in the first 3 days? And can I modify or enhance some piece of it in order to achieve what I really want? And so, because keep in mind, again, at the end of the day, I don't necessarily want a lower realtor commission. I want to net more money from the house sale transaction as quickly as reasonably possible. So, and then lastly, here's P for put it to some other use, and that is, of those elements that you've written down on your notepad, who else can use what you're negotiating for? I only recently learned, as we have the Shredco company come through and shred our old notes and papers and everything else, those guys actually sell your shredded paper to recyclers. I, of course, am not going to renegotiate the price of shredding the little bit that I have, but I wonder if I shredded a whole bunch, if I said, yes, I see that your price is X to shred all my stuff, and if you'd like to keep it, I'd like a 10% discount. And meaning, because at that point I have realized there's a different piece of this that we can put to an alternate use. So between ThinkPack and the Scamper technique, I think you've got tips to help you think about what you want to think about. But what else can help you become more creative? This is sort of the catch-all where I wanted to put a group of additional creativity catalysts. And for those that want to copy this presentation, I'm happy to share it with you, because here are 4 different areas where there are lots of different ideas. And by the way, for those who get the presentation, each one of these, there's a hyperlink, and that goes to my underlying source. I recognize, by the way, we're doing this at Sam Houston State University, and I certainly had to cite back to my sources, right? And so each one of these is a hyperlink to a separate source. But for example, analogies can be creativity catalysts, because what they do is they simplify the problem and they get rid of a lot of the extraneous noise and help us to focus on the actual problem at hand. Like, for example, think about the analogy of trying to meet this group's demands is like playing whack-a-mole. And so that is an analogy where now we're no longer focused about is this in the software context or the auto part context or anything, text or anything else. It just focuses on how much stuff that they are demanding. And what it does is it simplifies the problem, and it makes efficient use of mental capabilities in order to help you solve the problem. It gets rid of all the things you don't need to be thinking about as you solve the problem. Beyond that, networks, I think, are one of the key benefits here. I will tell you that I very often call on different friends and say, hey, have you ever been in this situation before? I didn't do it, but I could have called Gene and said, have you ever gotten your workout room painted? And I will tell you, the last time I negotiated a real estate transaction, somebody gave me a tip on how to monetize a house for sale for a great deal more, and it made a material change in my net worth at the time, and that came from a network. Next, I'll talk about diversity, because I think this is important. And studies show that diverse teams yield more ideas and more useful ideas. And I know that they are right. And I gave this some thought myself. And we all recall the parable of the blind men and the elephant, and where you've got multiple different people, one of whom says this is a tree, one of whom says this is a fountain, one of them whom says this is a blanket because they're feeling the ear, or whatever it was. But you're getting different information, different experiences, different opinions, different perspectives. And when what you're trying to do is the generative thinking that we were talking about, having those different perspectives can drive a completely different set of outcomes. Next, we can talk about tangible artifacts. I am a huge believer in writing stuff down, although I almost never look at my notes. Put stuff on whiteboards. I put stuff on little pocket notebooks like this one. I have a commonplace book for which is a central depository where I write down ideas. And why do those things work? They're written, they combine ideas, and there is truth to this. There is a connection between the motor neurons that are required to write down an idea and that part of the brain that generates new ideas. And so it's why taking notes, I think, is important, and in school as well as we in the commercial setting trying to generate new ideas. As we go down the tangible artifacts list, we see that they're visual and interactive, and those whiteboards are ideal for groups. And doodles and images also very, very important in the creativity context. I will admit that's what the research says. I am no good at that, and I have not woven that into my own practice, although I plan to soon. But lastly, mind maps. Those are methods for helping you to see how to organize different thoughts. Gene knows that I've been a huge proponent of mind maps for the past 15 years or so, and I'll give you all a quick example of a mind map. This is actually the mind map I did, or at least the top half of the mind map I did for this talk. And you may not be able to see it on your screen, but for example, this big yellow piece here says you cannot dig a hole in a different place by digging it digging the same hole deeper. And this is where I hung all my sources and all of my different thoughts. Importantly, by the way, there's another version out there that has all of the talking points that I didn't want to bother you with. But I want you to know that mind maps are an integral part, at least in my negotiation process. So lastly, because this is an educational institute, first and foremost, we got to have the obligatory biography, right? That's me. Then we go to resources. Did I really put my bio slide before my resources? And my marketing people must have done that. And then lastly, as we conclude, let's take just a minute to talk about where we've been, and we'll talk about a couple of questions. But in your next negotiation, this is what I said at the outset. Ask yourself, what are you assuming? What can you change? And are you ready to put in the time, the effort, and the focus to make that happen? You got to decide to be creative to get different results from a different approach. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time, 6 minutes, although I'm happy to answer questions as we go forward.
John, thank you so much. Look, I've got a full page of notes, and I could go more. And let me just share a couple of experiences if I can. John is the type of guy, when he says he does something, he does. And I've had the great pleasure of being at his office in the Deep Ellum part of Dallas. And he's introduced me to the whiteboard concept. And he's got whiteboards throughout his office. He introduced me to the mind mapping stuff. He does this, and these are tools that help him to be successful. And so to the students who are on here, one of the things I'd just like to encourage is this is a good time to, find some different tools. And John's been very generous with things like a whiteboard, the commonplace book, that type of thing. We do have some time for some questions. If anyone has some questions, please put them in the chat. We'll get to them. And John, I've received a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of them is that you've talked about a commonplace book. Can you tell us more about a commonplace book, what it is, and how you use it?
And by the way, the I'm going to go back just one click on my talk. I guess it says end slideshow, so I got to click to exit. It is a there we go. So there is the idea is that you have one notebook, and that is, I mean, you may have them a bunch for different schools, different classes, or whatever else, but you have a single notebook, and you write down, let's say you run across great ideas about creativity. And so you'll write down stuff about creativity on one page, and on the next page, it might be negotiation tactics. You might consider that a separate source. And then you might want to put down great recipes, and then the next might be tips to get your Cub Scout to Eagle Scout, or whatever else. Whatever the things are that interest you, you handwrite them in this book. And there's actually a fantastic, if you Google, or if somebody reaches out to me, there's a great indexing system that is too complex to go through while we're talking here, but you put it all into one notebook, and it just sort of stays in your backpack. And I happen to have a Right in the Rain waterproof one. I don't work for those guys, or this is not sponsored. And I use waterproof ink because I spill a lot. And so in any event.
Do we have some other questions?
John, I have a question.
Sure.
How do you handle a negotiation that you don't have hours to sit and think through? How can we train ourselves to automatically think creatively?
So it's a fantastic question, Jessica, and thank you for that. And so obviously, if you've got hours to think through it, you can, that is optimal. But even in a situation where you're doing things on the fly, even if you just take that one moment to sort of step back and say, what is it that he or she really wants? And by the way, a little bit of small talk goes a long way. Remember my workout room painter guys, when I said, hey, what do you guys do when it rains? And they said, nothing. And that just, it might seem like a little bit of small talk, but that gave the example. So ask a few questions and empathize. And one question that I almost always fall back on is, when I'm negotiating with someone, is not how can I get more? It is how can I get more incremental revenue, or whatever they're looking for him or her while I'm talking to them. And because it very often will open up a channel that nobody has yet thought of.
Thank you.
Other questions? If not, I've got, Vanessa has one. Vanessa, we trust you. You can turn your mic on and and ask. Let's see.
Or Vanessa, if you press the space bar, you can just press the space bar and it'll unmute.
It did. Thank you, John. You problem solved. Okay, so thank you. All of your stories have been really interesting to hear. Had never heard of the Black Pebble story. It seems like women are always being put in positions where we've got to take the burden on. So appreciate that. How do you handle the no's? Because I'm sure it sounds like you are very good at negotiating, but how do you handle when the painter says, yeah, no rainy days. This is the price. This is what we're doing. Any advice on how to kind of reframe or try again, or?
Yeah, Vanessa, that's a great question. And I actually, when I was in college, I worked under a guy named Sid Hill, who was a professor at Mississippi State, and I studied negotiation under him. And key takeaway from him was the power to negotiate is the power to walk away. And so if you have to get your workout room painted this afternoon, you don't have a lot of choice. You can try, but at the end of the day, that's not really negotiating. That's just attempting to change the deal. But if you can walk away, and this is not a slam your book down and walk away, you can. But what you can say is, I don't at that price. I'm not ready to commit yet. But maybe we'll call back next week or whatever else. One of the things people very often do is they ignore the element of time. because we all want to get things done and get things off the to-do list. You leave something hanging out there for a little while, it's like fishing, and very often they'll come back. And if they don't, you can then always go back to that bad deal you turned down once already.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Sure.
Well, by my university sponsored clock, it's 1:01 p.m. And so, man, I tell you, I could listen to John forever. And we've had some very nice conversations at Central Market and at his office, and some very creative conversations. In the absence of any sort of last minute questions, raise your hand if you got one. I just want to say that, John, thank you so much for being here today. You've really shared a lot with our campus community, and we appreciate you. We're getting a lot of very nice comments in the chat thanking you, and you know, just want to encourage y'all. John has a lot of stuff up on the internet that's really thoughtful, good stuff. John, if you don't mind, real quick, where are some resources where people can look at some of your thoughts on settlement, negotiation, those types of things?
So, and I haven't been there in a while. I had a blog about 10 years ago called settlementperspectives.com. And there's a lot on negotiation in there. I haven't been to the site in quite some time, but that's out there. And also slideshare.net/John DeGroote. But I will also pass along that, Gene, I'm going to send you this this presentation. And for folks that want to dig into all the hyperlinks, I think you have to look at it in slideshow mode and then click on the hyperlinks. It'll take you to my root sources. And given that I have the attention span that I do, there's no source in there that's more than a few hundred words. And so I think you can, in an hour, kind of fly through what's here and be a different negotiator in no time.
So we'll when we get that from John, we'll email it to the participants. And John, thank you again for your generosity in that, and for your generosity in providing these really cool think packs. They're awesome. If you're not on campus and you're a winner of a think pack, you will get an email from our office, and we'll say, congratulations, you're a randomly selected winner. And we'll ask you to give us, let us know when you're on campus, or if you're going to want us to dig into our budget and mail it to you. We'll try and find some budget money for that, and we'll mail it to you. But you'll be getting an email from us. So thank you all again. John, again, thank you so much. This was wonderful, and we appreciate y'all. And y'all have a great day. Take some time to think about things and to be creative. And I don't know where to end this. We need to have a cup of coffee with this and keep going. Lindsay's saying, like, eat them up cats. Like
exactly. Got it. Thank y'all.
All right. Y'all take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.